Glasgow studio. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Geeksvana Live. It's been a busy week, hasn't it? What with product releases and people flying drones at airplanes, people not believing that drones can possibly damage airplanes, etc. It's been an interesting week. We even had to put a report out earlier to confirm that Ben Affleck is not under suspicion of flying the drone into the Super Scooper. There was an online sort of conversation that started to get a good amount of feedback on where yes, the FBI and police did actually visit his home, but to actually ask for the CCTV footage, and I don't think he was even there when they went round, but it was that team, so that part was correct. But of course, good old online social media, it became that, almost you're expecting pictures of him in cuffs with his Mini 3 controller being put in the back of the police car with him. But there we go. Always keep an eye on the community tab, because we try and use that. We've put extra photos of the airplane that was hit. We always try to put a bit more info on there, and I'm going to be using that a lot more in the future. But this evening, we're starting a new series in terms of live streams and videos, actually, on a particular topic, which is surrounding the UK regulator of airspace, the CAA. And just a very quick shout out to all the new people, all the new and old people, of course, but all of the people in the chat. I've noticed a few of them tonight already saying this is the first show they're catching live. So welcome. So as many of you will know, as a channel, Geeksvana is supportive of good airspace regulation for drones. That's a very precise sentence there. That's something that should be achieved through what I feel would be effective work by the airspace regulator, the CAA. Although regular viewers will have seen a number of broadcasts on this channel which are focused on issues or problems created when the UK CAA either make errors or provide incorrect information, we have until now remained supportive of the regulator and worked with them despite what I feel are many hurdles to keep a somewhat united front in terms of what is published. The main reason is really a personal one from me. It's my channel. I do not believe that too much is achieved by creating an image of the airspace regulator that can actually end up leading to more drone operators turning their back on the advice and regulations the CAA provides. My role, as I've seen it, is to get the correct information to my audience. That's really always been the role, the function in terms of regulation on drones that I've always tried to complete, get the information out there. I never wanted to become a CAA auditor of types. Geeksvana was never intended to be an audit channel. There you go. There's a sentence I never thought I would say out loud. It has become increasingly frustrating, however, to do so over the past couple of years, leading us to a position where we are routinely pointing out issues in advice documents or even CAP documents, to finding what appear to be outright misleading statements in annual accounts. Leaving aside the annual safety report errors, the errors in CAP documents, giving people conflicting advice from one paragraph to the next, or even the changes to the drone code brought about through the work of Geeksvana, the inclusion of information that, in my opinion, misleads everyone involved, including Parliament and the public, leads me to a position where we need to bring to the attention of our audience a number of issues and experiences over the past couple of years. So we're now at a point where I feel the public interest is best served in exposing the information and stories behind the workings of the CAA, rather than seeking to continue to attempt to continuously repair relationships for the good of the information flow, and of course, therefore, you guys, my audience, getting that information. So in a series of videos, this being the first one, we will be providing information on a number of issues. These will include, tonight, we'll be discussing more on the CAA annual accounts, a document submitted to Parliament as required by legislation, of course. Regular viewers will remember that before Christmas, we held a live show explaining how the evidence provided to Geeksvana directly by the CAA, they literally pointed us towards it, actually led to us to the discovery that figures quoted in the annual accounts were dramatically incorrect. Tonight, we will provide information and details on what happened next, the next stage, which was pre-action legal documentation between the CAA and our guest, Richard Ryan, who sought essentially to start the judicial review process based on the issues surrounding the annual accounts and others. We have more interesting information to provide. So yeah, get ready for that one in just a couple of minutes. Other broadcasts in the series will include a panel discussion. The link is already published on the channel homepage for this Monday. It will include guests of Richard Ryan, Matt Williams, and Mark Worry, who until recently was a senior manager with the RPAS setup of the CAA. So we've got some really interesting feedback in terms of that panel. And we're going to be discussing really where we sit and what needs to happen next, but also, of course, talking about some more shared experiences from the last few years. In addition to this, I'll be providing my own timeline of my interactions with the CAA, along with full evidence of what I feel is manipulation, misleading statements, and what I feel were general attempts to derail reporting. This is a video that I've always resisted making, because who really cares what happens to one journalist dealing with a regulator? You know, oh, poor Sean, never mind. The focus was always on getting the information and not my experience. I always attempt to not be the story. It's always the attempt, I say. However, with issues like the CAA directly requesting that we moderate comments on our channel or they will withdraw support, outright lies in terms of promised actions by a deputy comms director to ensure free information was flowing, direct complaints to Geeksvana that we are then almost immediately withdrawn over our conduct when we don't back down, and going from in-person complete apologies from the CAA to Geeksvana to accusations of unprofessional behaviour just a few months later. The information becomes important in terms of ensuring the full story now comes out. And I think it is an important part of the picture. Hence, we have made the video on it. One of the most frustrating parts of this experience is, beyond the wasted hours personally, attempting to gain such simple simple answers and running the gauntlet of the comms. But my insistence many times that should they prefer not to simply deal with us, then don't. But it's always been an attempt by them to keep on dealing. So keep an eye out on the channel for these and more content. The Monday show is already linked on the channel, so you can go across and hit the Remind Me button for that one already. And there will also be follow-up articles on our community tab as well. We've also recently agreed a deal for the series to be published in wider press, and details will be forthcoming on that very soon, also in the community tab. So keep an eye out for all of that exciting stuff. And then at the end of the series, in terms of what we're then going to be telling you, is how you can, our audience can take action to bring about a parliamentary inquiry to look at the core issues that's surrounding the false statements, etc., and the general conduct at the moment of the CAA. So back to tonight, and we have the issues surrounding the annual accounts to deal with. We are joined, by, as usual, by the wonderfully attired Graham Degg and special guest Richard Ryan. Recent reviewers will know him from his recent appearances on Geeksvana. Richard is a barrister who specialises in the world of drones, and you can find the link to his chambers, Blakistons, in the description below. I would recommend storing his details somewhere handy for any future issues that you may have, wink, wink. It could come in very handy. Following our show discussing what I felt were misleading statements in the CAA annual accounts surrounding claims of existing growth numbers, Richard launched pre-action work towards what is called a judicial review, which we'll explain in just a moment. We will then be looking at some of those documents and the responses given by the CAA to confirm their truth behind those statements in terms of time, so we don't go on for 5 hours. Not that I could speak for 10 hours about this type of topic, but just so we keep your time, dear viewer, precious, we'll be focusing on the responses as these will of course explain the questions asked as well. But in an effort of transparency, you can find right now, it's already there, a zipped file link in the description to all of the correspondence relating to this pre-action legal documentation. It is important that the documents are, of course, published in their entirety. So that's enough from me, droning on, as it were. Droning, do you get it? And let's bring the guys in. So here we are. Graham.
Good evening. Happy New Year to anybody
see
who didn't catch us the first one, and you too. And
Are we still
definitely
allowed to say Happy New Year?
Yeah, we are. Yeah,
you sure?
only halfway through
Where's the line?
I think we're just in. I think
Okay.
it's just about safe. So Happy New Year.
Well, a miserable New Year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Do we now start?
You can have the choice.
And Richard, thank you very much for joining us again. I really do appreciate it. It's not only all of your time that you've spent in support of the industry and the hobby in drone use in general, but we appreciate you coming along and helping us on the channel explain things basically.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you for your kind introduction. I'm glad to be here. Should be a good outing, I think.
Yes. It's wrong to say it should be fun because we shouldn't be having this kind of fun, but you have to take pride in your work, don't you? I think is what I fall back on anyway. That's my excuse.
Can I add, just because there's something else that's going on that will become clear to people, I think, over the next possibly 2 weeks or so. I am pro regulation. I am pro an effective regulator and professional regulation. So that's it. If anybody is listening and might question that through this, that's where I am. Thank you.
Talk about an in reference there.
People do get confused.
Yes, and it's an important one actually, because I feel uncomfortable when I put this kind of show together, when I've put other shows together which to point out errors and that type of thing. But sometimes it's been the only way that we've been able to gain any kind of action or traction, basically. And a lot of what we have put out over the last 12 months in particular, but even over the last 3 to 4 years, wouldn't have actually come out at all if it wasn't for a YouTube channel talking about it, basically. So so yeah, but it is important to still stress that, as I stated, we're not rebellious of the regulations in full from that point of view. We just want it to happen fairly and be applied fairly as well, actually, because a lot of the current regs aren't that bad. They just don't get applied in perhaps the most fair, correct manner. So, Richard, could you explain briefly the action that you took following the information that came out? And just before you do that, I'll just remind people that haven't seen it. This was the paragraph we're talking about when you hear about the annual accounts paragraph. And this is basically talking about digitizing the specific category operations known as DISCO or DSCO, depending on which CAA report. I believe some inside don't like calling it DISCO, so they took the I out, which is always fun. And yes, so basically it's the figures at the bottom there which cause the most issue, where it says the consistent and standardized way to assess operational risk aligned to global standards enables an efficient application that is scalable to meet the forecast demand in the industry in the future from around 7,000 per annum today to over 75,000 per annum by 2030. And that information coming out prompted some action from you, Richard.
Yes, it did. So following our last chat on your channel, Sean, where you disclosed this was a really interesting takeaway for me, because knowing that we're dealing with a regulator and we've got an upcoming review on the scheme of charges,
yes,
I was interested to know if the two were inextricably linked. But first of all, in order to find out whether they were or not, we needed to establish how they came about, these figures, and were they actually correct or not. And so the method of doing that in England is by way of judicial review. And a judicial review is a way of not just holding the government to account or governmental bodies, but it's a way of challenging government decisions or omissions. So there are two aspects to it. And so in order to commence a judicial review, as with pretty much any civil litigation in England and Wales, one has to go through a pre-action procedure. And the pre-action procedure is there to ultimately try and keep legal costs down, because if you can narrow the issues or come to an agreement, then that's one way of doing it, or two ways of doing it, sorry, because either you narrow the issues so it's not a big bucket full of stuff that you have to go to court and argue, which could take weeks and weeks and weeks. If you can narrow the issues to just a few, you could only be in court for a day or a couple of days or whatever it's going to be. Less cost, right? And the other aspect to it is a form of dispute resolution, alternative dispute resolution, often known as ADR, which could be mediation. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard about mediation, but there's also arbitration, there's expert determination. There are a number of ways of dispute resolution. So I want to try and resolve the dispute. So it's always good in a pre-action letter to offer to engage in alternative dispute resolution. So taking and armed with the information that you and Graham kindly provided me with respect to CAP 3010 and the annual accounts, did a bit more digging. And really, because they came from the CAA, which is a public body, they have a statutory obligation to make sure that the accounts are correct because they're presented by the Minister for Aviation in Parliament. And this is really key because this underlines the seriousness of their obligation. And so what I did was I initiated the pre-action letter before claim for judicial review. And I wrote the letter to the CAA challenging the information that they had put out. And so there you go. So there's the letter there. And the details I've highlighted of the decision to be challenged, because as I said, it's a decision or an omission, was the fact that they included inaccurate figures in page 71 of CAP 3010. CAP, for anybody that didn't know, stands for Civil Aviation Publication. So that's CAP 3010. And where they misquoted, as far as we're concerned,
Yes,
how many drone operators were operating on what was projected by 2030. And so what I then had to do was establish my grounds for judicial review, which you can see there before you. And effectively, it's focused on three aspects: illegality, irrationality, and procedural impropriety. So what I'm saying is ultimately they acted unlawfully because they're in breach of their duties under the Civil Aviation Authority order for auditing and accounts. They were irrational because they hadn't properly sourced or verified where those figures came from. And in later correspondence, we learned that they refused to provide me with that information. And of course, procedural impropriety. Now, we're relying on the CAA, the ultimate regulator in the UK for aviation, to make sure that they can adopt and follow proper procedures when it comes to verifying data accuracy, making sure their internal controls are correct. So there is no misrepresentation. And here I'm saying, well, actually, when we look at what you've quoted and the figures, which you can see that follow with respect to the relevant facts, we can see there are substantial differences in what they've put forward.
indeed, absolutely. Can we then, I'll bring up the CAA letter in just a moment, but in terms of the action required, could you talk about that next in terms of, just so the audience knows what the essentially what you were asking for in terms of the resolution, so that this obviously didn't have to go forward with an expensive judicial review, etc.
That's right. So ultimately, what I'm now offering is a CAA a get out of jail free card, ultimately, right? By requesting that they take some formal action. The first was to correct the inaccuracies in CAP 3010 and communicate those corrections to everybody in the public domain.
Yes,
because they're the regulator, they're a public servant, they operate for the public, and therefore their duty is to the public. And on that point, I mean, what might be useful to reference here are the civil service values, which talk about integrity, honesty, objectivity, and impartiality. It's really important civil service values here that the CAA should and must subscribe to, because they're
yes,
sponsored
absolutely.
EFT. So, and then what I asked for was a public apology, which we learned that they didn't really like at all.
No,
They don't like those, do they?
no.
They don't. So, what they want to do is slip it in under the radar, the correction through Parliament, to correct the inaccuracies in CAP 3010. I then also asked for full disclosure So I want to see all the documentation that related to the inclusion of these incorrect figures. So, I wanted to know how they arrived at such an inaccuracy. And what we see in some of their correspondence, without taking the wind out of his sail, Sean, is the fact that they admit to going through lots of layers before a report's published. And
it's incredible.
How many layers are we talking about? And then finally, I was asking for a thorough review of their internal processes and controls to prevent future recurrences. And I, funny enough, suspect that any inaccuracies this year, they will be prevented because of this.
Yes.
So,
well,
I mean, that last one particularly isn't something we haven't asked for before, is it? I mean,
no, but obviously asking for it in a pre-action. Yeah,
clearly through this process, hopefully there will be a stronger response. But we've picked up this before on the safety report where they got it wrong again on exactly the same issue. So perhaps they're just getting too good at getting it wrong.
What's interesting as well, of course, is the now infamous meeting at DroneX, where we met with them when myself and Graham were there. And it was actually promised that a review of all CAP documents was underway. This, of course, is still CAP 3010 is still a CAP document, and that they're underway to. I presume they just hadn't got round to this yet when they decided to send it to the journalist who was asking questions as evidence of something else. And I think that's has gone into my brain and has taken over a little bit from the point of view of not only is this incredibly incorrect and just should not be in the document, because that is a whole other level of misleading, lies, however else anybody wants to describe it, but to then present that document in defense of another challenged item, which is the scheme of charges, to say, and actually point us towards top of page 51, you'll see the paragraph there on Disco. To me, I just find that incredible, but it shows the danger. This is the danger of the type of thing that Ian over at UAV Hive tries to do with his freedom of information exposures, etc., because it shows the danger of allowing the incorrect information to sit somewhere and then, of course, be used elsewhere. And I'm very concerned about where else this may have potentially ended up being used. Obviously, we're assured, and we'll come on to the CAA letter now, obviously we're assured at great length that nothing incorrect was used anywhere, despite the fact that it's actually in the annual accounts, which to me is serious enough. So this is one of the main response that we're going to go through. As I say, there are other responses, and you can see how the journey went. We'll get Richard's explanation of that after we've gone through this. But there's always fun and games. But as usual, you'll expect a bit of procedural back and forth and that type of thing. It's interesting. I actually found it interesting that they gave. I didn't actually designate this or highlight this to be spoken about, but one of the things that raised an eyebrow and a small smile was the fact that they wanted to confirm and clarify with you that your descriptor of drone operators was incorrect in your letter. Actually, it's operational authorizations. When, of course, one of the problems is that they didn't actually specify that in the report itself. I found that quite incredible that they would, and the wording was, to avoid, any issue, we've clarified this for you. It's like, oh, okay, crikey, you're happy to clarify that on a letter, but you can't clarify it in your own reports. It's unfortunate it triggers me, this kind of thing. But
and actually, if you read that because those two numbers appear in one sentence, it's a long sentence that starts about 5 lines up. And if you read that as a sentence, it can only be talking about one thing.
Yes.
Both numbers are talking about or are being referred to in relation to applications for operational authorizations.
That's right. Yes.
That's yes. It. Well, that sentence locks both of those together as being the same thing. So if one of them is operational authorizations,
I did actually highlight
both operational authorizations. Now we'll have a look at the letter and see how they skip around and call them everything under the sun.
Yes,
depending on what answer we need.
So yeah, but that was actually
really
0.7. Yes, it's
sorry.
No,
they're
please.
Tripping over their own terminology.
Yes, it's incredible. So that actually was 0.7. I ended up highlighting it because I think it did trigger me enough. So point 8 in their response was the CAA accepts the figures on page 51 were taken from a 2021-2022 internal document and inadvertently used out of context. Okay, the 2021-2022 internal document indicated the data held was 7,000 active operational authorizations and industry predictions of 75,000 drones flying by 2030. Now, even just that one answer to me is incredible, frankly. I find it astonishing that they can that can be put forward as an answer, frankly, because it just feels, you know, what on earth, because they're basically stating the document that it was from a 2021 internal document. Why is that still being used in 2024? And why was there not an asterisk saying these figures are from an internal document explaining what they are? Because of course in their own report they don't even actually, I feel, could be intentionally, they don't actually mark what it's actually for. And of course, you know, and again, then they say that in their own response, the active operational authorizations and industry predictions of approximately 75,000 drones flying by 2030.
I mean, there's more than that flying now, guys.
Yes, but how can the today figure be operational authorizations?
Yeah,
and the prediction be how many drones flying? Which obviously there's far more drones than 75,000 already flying. But yeah, it's how can one paragraph that you point to in terms of justifying this schedule of charges, how can this hit? So from around 7,000 per annum today to over 75,000 per annum by 2030, you would not expect those two figures to be completely different things, and also to be effectively, I'm not going to say they're made up, but to be effectively made up from the point of view of they're just, you know, random figures plucked out of internal reports. How do we know how accurate those reports were?
Internal reports that are dated 2 years before this year's report.
Yeah, because Tim from Xdesk in the FS&I team feels like there's going to be 75,000. That as far as we know, that's all the basis is, because it appeared in a report. And I've got some reports I'd like to submit, including I think Geeksvana should get lots of funding, but it's just a report. So, you know,
we could probably find a report from the 18th century saying man will never fly. So
yes.
Go and dig that one out.
That's exactly it. Yes.
But it ultimately goes to the point, doesn't it, with respect to me asking for their internal documents to see how they got to this point.
Yeah.
If you're using documents that are 3 or 4 years old, what level of scrutiny do you have within your procedures to ensure that what goes before Parliament is actually correct?
Yes.
And what we've discovered here is they may well have some procedures in place, I don't know, but certainly they've been defective.
And this is, of course, a question that we've had before, and we will bring this up on Monday when Mark, if he's still brave enough to join us, Mark Worry, who's in the chat. We've made you an auditor. Sorry, I saw you answering ACE audits. Actually, we've made you a moderator in the chat so everybody can see it. It's the real Mark Worry. But yes, it's actually something we asked in terms of in one of our interviews, and Mark kindly answered it as openly as he possibly could, which was to ask. In terms of proofreading, and it was confirmed that they don't have anybody proofreading, basically, which to say I'm astonished about is an understatement. But then actually, bizarrely, I don't know if you agree with this, Graham, from the other reports and things that we've done since, it's become more and more obvious that actually that is the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is incredible, basically. Absolutely.
I think, you know, an interesting question that's come up in the chat there from Nick W is what is this challenge supposed to achieve? What is the overall strategy? And I think in answer to that question, this, as far as I'm aware, is probably one of the first occasions where the CAA have actually been challenged with respect to UAS since it's been insurrected. Now, you know, I've not heard of any other challenge through judicial review. And I think it's really important that the regulators held to account. And this is the legal route to doing that. And it's the only legal route available. Apart from alternative dispute resolution, which one could argue is still part of this legal route, which I did offer as well. But if you've got to hold a regulator to account because they provided misleading information, the underlying basis of that is what else has been misleading?
Yes.
Are they correct
processes?
And are they consistent and competent?
Exactly.
At the end of the day, it's from when we were in. Sorry.
No. Please carry on.
When we're in the EU and the EU passed the regulations, they have to go to what's known as the competent authority. Now, are we saying that the CAA are the incompetent authority? is the $1 million question right now? Exactly. And this is one way of testing whether they're actually competent or not to do what it is that they're supposed to do. And
exactly.
So
yes. Well said.
Here is an example of testing that. And that's why this is really important.
What this would also... Sorry, Graham, just one thing to answer that question as well, because it's always good to answer questions when we can. And in terms of Geeksvana, what all of this will lead to is at the end of this series, so in about 10 days' time, we'll be coming to you, our viewers, including the person that's asked that question, and asking you to review everything you've seen on the channel to that point on this series, and asking you to put forward, to download a letter, or write your own letter to your MP to request a parliamentary inquiry, so that we can start to get some kind of independent transparency and independent questioning at a more senior level, because it is my experience as a journalist who has dealt with the CAA for several years now that we need the drains up. Basically, we need someone to get in there. It's time to call the plumbers in, get the drains up, and have a proper look at actually what's going on. And I don't believe, as much as I've tried to do this hand in hand with them, I don't believe that that's going to happen unless an external force comes into conflict with them. And that, of course, at the moment is Richard Ryan, frankly. Now,
and we've both said that we are fans of competent, effective regulation. If we get the review of the internal processes, and if they put robust internal processes in place for this document, then those same processes can be used for the guidance documents, which at the moment have caused so many issues and which essentially don't help safety.
It's an interesting one though, because and that's always been one of my sort of fallbacks, and one of my reports has always been we used to deal with different people at the CAA, and we would always get a situation where we would spot a problem, I'd report it. Sometimes by the time the show even goes live, it's corrected, and we have an explanation and it's dealt with. And I was happy because then the right guidance, the right documentation is out there. I feel like this almost goes beyond even Richard's requests now in terms of internal reviews and that type of thing, and we need to know genuinely what is going on, because the figures and the stats for the industry side of drones, the commercial or the specific category, are plummeting. And before this incredible fee-earning industry disappears and people's livelihoods disappear, because there are some quite sizable companies now involved in the specific category, employing people that putting their kids through college and university, etc. And we need to see that that's being handled correctly, because at the moment, it is my personal opinion that it's not. Okay, so moving on to the next one, and actually 9 and 10 for some reason hasn't come out on my on-screen version, so I've pulled up another version. Number 9 actually states the 7,000 figure reflects the active RPAS operational authorizations in 2020, which was approximately 6,939. As noted in the PAP letter, the 75,000 figure was a reference to the predicted number of drones flying by 2030 from PwC's Skies Without Limits V1 published report, which someone in the chat did state that they were aware that some of the information was from that. So again, confirmation that the information is pulled out of one, yes, okay, official figure that's 4 years out of date. Why have that in the 2024 figures? I presume those figures were in the 2020 ones. And the fact that, of course, the real figure is 3,000 odd leads you to then suggests that perhaps the 6,900 sounds better. Who knows? The 75,000 being used so far out of context from an internal report that's based on a PW Skies V1. Bear in mind that in itself is now many years old, several years old, and in tech, a year is and especially in technology like drones, etc. A year is a long time, and V1 is an old report now. There have been further reports from PwC. The Skies Without Limits since. So it's incredible.
And it's a report with a huge caveat on it saying, please don't use these numbers.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
And the CAA just blocked them out.
Which we pointed out in the last show. We showed the last page, which basically said, this is a bit of a thing we've put together because we were asked to put a thing together.
Have fun with it.
Have fun, but please, I think the wording was around, please take consultation, or rather don't use in consultation, and please take, professional advice if you want to use these figures.
Well, PwC clearly don't want to take on anybody else's responsibility or liability for relying on the report. Right?
Yes.
Which is why the caveat's there.
Yeah.
And so what we've got is that clear caveat at the end of the report. And that seems to be the basis of an internal document that was used to justify these figures at the moment, unless we can see otherwise, which at the moment we haven't been able to.
No, that's right, 100%. And then point 11, which is the other one, which half comes back onto the page, so I'll bring the page back up, is it is denied that the CAA knowingly presented false and misleading information in the annual report. At the time of publishing the annual report, the CAA believed the figures on page 51 of the annual report were accurate. All aspects.
Why did they believe that?
Well,
they didn't check them, did they?
But how can they be accurate? Because they're from two different things.
They're accurate when they've got other numbers that are different.
Yeah,
and other numbers in the
same report. That's right.
In the same report.
Yeah. So all aspects of the annual reports and accounts are formally reviewed at many levels, both internally with the CAA and externally. As the page 51 figures have now been identified as an error in the annual report, the CAA is working quickly to publish a correction. I note that we still don't have that correction.
No, it's still an issue.
Of course, it needs to go through Parliament, of course. But yes.
Just on the wording there, Sean, where the CAA believes that the figures are correct. Well, that's a CAA collectively, so that must include the CEO of the CAA, who also believed that report was correct.
Yes.
And so, the buck stops with him ultimately before it then goes over to the Department for Transport for the Minister to present to Parliament.
Yes.
Who must also believe it's correct.
Exactly, because they are stating that the figures have now been identified as an error in the annual report, which is a very kind way of describing it. Despite in this same paragraph, it's this same paragraph thing again, stating that when it went through its audits, they believed the annual report was accurate. That means that can, in my opinion, that cannot be read any other way than the people who were supposed to be checking that particular part of the documentation, who would have had the experience and the knowledge, must have known they were incorrect because they've signed off a document to say these are accurate. That has happened at somewhere. I'm not accusing anybody of why that happens and that type of thing, but at some point, and then of course, as Richard was saying, as that's passed further up the chain, people are of course assuming everyone's done their job, and I assume that's the same in the accounts for all of the departments that are spoken about in the accounts. Where I suppose by the time it gets to CEO level, they probably hope that everyone's done their job below them, which is why it then becomes a really serious thing in terms of Richard's request to have the disclosure and have the documents. We need all the documents. We need all of the reporting in terms of the memos, everything that brought about that one paragraph in page 51. Now that shouldn't be reams and reams of documentation. There shouldn't really be anything that's top secret, because apparently it's worked off of PwC and internal reports, etc. So we're not talking about a security issue here. So that request for information, I feel, is reasonable. But Graham, I cut you off.
Yeah, they're focusing on the wrong thing. If they're focusing on just the numbers, they can look at that individual number 7,000, the individual 75,000, and they can find excuses. It's the way those numbers have been used in that specific sentence. which they've been put
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
That sentence has been crafted to show a growth rate which
That's right.
requires a scalable platform.
Yes.
When in reality, the level of scaling needs to go from
That's
about
right.
3,000 to about 3,500.
Yes.
That is not a scalable system. Doesn't need to be.
Because, of course, 3,000 to 75,000 might sound a bit big, but actually 7,000 to 75,000 is a scalable figure. Yeah, no, exactly.
And with scalability comes cost, and with cost comes funding.
Yes,
right?
Correct.
From the government.
Correct.
Exactly.
So, question: was that wording manipulated in such a way as to argue strongly with the DfT that the CAA need more funding? I don't know the answer to that question, obviously.
And it's another question, and I feel that's actually one of the key questions as well. Actually, as we stated in the original show, where else has this information been used?
Where has it been used, and what for?
Was in my mind, I start thinking, was this a paragraph they've used because it's already been cleared somewhere else for use in funding requests or something else, and they're like, okay, we'll use those figures because we use them over there, etc. Because it seems bizarre to me that the comms team would pass me a document knowing that there's, when I first read it, my first thoughts were, is someone throwing somebody else under the bus here? Because these figures just don't seem right. It was a bizarre discovery to say the least. Okay, so point 12, it is denied that by publishing the annual report, the CAA breached its statutory duties under the Civil Aviation Authority auditing and accounts. Amendments, etc. Those sections provided the Secretary of State shall appoint annually independent auditors. The CAA complied with its statutory duties, so of course they're going to deny that point. So I can understand that, but I feel it's important that we include within this show that they did deny that. For the avoidance of doubt, at no stage has the CAA represented that the estimated number of drones by 2030 is approximately 75,000 for the purpose of the 2025-2026 scheme of charges consultation, nor has it used the 75,000 number directly in the CAA's modelling for the scheme of charges. This position appears to be accepted in the PAP letter. The scheme of charges consultation used figures of 2,806 operational authorisations and 3,475 operationals, because bear in mind, people, the projected is not 75,000 of the thing,
it's
the report.
3,475.
Which is what you think the report is suggesting if you read it in the format of that sentence. It's 3,475, which is just mind-blowing. Now,
you'd almost rub your chin and ask, why didn't they use 3,475 in that sentence and that other number? That
it feels like it would have been simpler, wouldn't it? If they have a projection figure, which they state it here, operational authorizations, it's here. Their projection is already here. Numbers. Why not use it? Why not use it because they use the word projection in the report. My issue with this, though, if I could just very quickly, because we've got so much to say about these things, it's incredible. Passion for regulation is wonderful, I have to say, but it also confuses me because I was sent that report and pointed to that paragraph when asking for information as to why the scheme of charges is going up to £530, etc., and possibly more with the inflationary percentage.
So at that stage they did represent.
That
for the purposes of scheme of charges.
We don't know that because, of course, it could have been sent to me in error, and there could be other parts of that line. But it's strange that it's sent to a journalist to justify something, but yet we're then told it was never used for that.
Yeah.
So why send me
control the narrative?
Yeah, exactly. And this is why this kind of and Matt Williams is also in the Matt Williams and Mark Worry, who are two of the other guests who will be with us on Monday. Really looking forward to that show for so many reasons. If not only just have Matt Williams and Mark Worry on the same screen, but Matt Williams is here as well, and he's talking about the fact that they have attempted, as he did as an RAE, as the largest RAE in the UK, to get a lot of these answers over several years, and nobody had taken the legal route before. And of course, these answers are coming forward because someone like Richard has put their neck on the line in terms of, wanting to submit a judicial review and not waiting for anybody else to do it. He put it forward. It's sort of the lawyer becoming the client, which is which is incredible. So it shows why this level of holding to account is so important, and we certainly thank Richard for doing that, because it's incredible. So yes,
it's good in the number 13, because now we're in no doubt, because we've avoided doubt because they've told us something different. So now we're in no doubt
yes,
as to what the answer is.
Could you just flash that paragraph 12 up again, please?
Yes.
So you've got at the bottom, it says there, with respect to statutory duties, was it 12?
statutory duties under section 15(1).
Yeah, sorry. What was the last paragraph we were just talking about? Sorry, 13. 13. Yeah. I beg your pardon.
No problem.
So there we've got them talking about a scheme of charges consultation and the figures that were used, which they used together with other CAA current modelling. Now, so they're going to use that consultation to come up with the charges, and then they're going to manipulate those with CAA current modelling. Question on that for me is, well, we're looking at the consultation. I've certainly attacked that using Freedom of Information Act requests, which we could talk about another time, and look at that. But where did they get the CAA current modelling from? What modelling platform are they using? How are they using it? How is it being tested? There's a whole load of questions that wrap around that, because it isn't just a consultation on its own. They've admitted there that it's together with modelling. So they're doing the two at the same time.
Yes,
so
exactly.
How is that model being manipulated to get what it is that they need from it?
And one point I would just make
I've
there.
I've got Excel spreadsheets, and I can do that, Richard. I can show you how to do that on an Excel spreadsheet.
One point to make there is that's why I'm a YouTuber and Richard is a barrister, and why you need to contact a legal representation, people like Richard, as early as possible in these things, because they will spot things that no one else spots and say, hang on a minute, there's a thread there, and they pull the thread and it takes the whole jumper apart, basically. But yeah, a fantastic point. Thank you for making it. On irrationality, the CAA admits the figures on page 51 were included in the annual report in error. Okay, even though the fact that obviously further up here they say that they were correct
and checked multiple times. Yes. Oh, they're the incorrect, the erroneous numbers are definitely correct.
What I like about this particular part, sorry to interrupt. What I like about this particular part is that the admission to this is made under the paragraph irrationality, and the second sentence in 14 says they deny that this amounts to irrationality or reasonableness. So why not make the admission somewhere else in the document?
Yes, yeah, indeed. It's incredible. I mean, I don't want to suggest that was this checked, but anyway. Did anybody actually read this in, where the specific questions answered and perhaps not formally reviewed? Who knows? It is denied the CAA decided to include incorrect figures without proper sourcing or verification. As mentioned above, at the time of the publishing the annual report, the CAA believed the figures were accurate. As mentioned above, all aspects of the annual report are formally reviewed. Now, I will just quickly flick back across to this page and show you that there are no asterisks, there are no source numbers or anything else like that, and there's nothing at the bottom of the page whatsoever.
No footnotes.
No footnotes to show any kind of references, keeping in mind that when they talk about these figures, they mean two completely different things. Yes. And they've just decided not to explain it.
It's from around 7,000 oranges to around 75,000 elephants by 2030.
Do you know, the bizarre thing is that's probably that's not that inaccurate, because to say 7,000 operational authorizations to 75,000 drones as per PwC report is like oranges to elephants, actually. So we may have found one of the models that we used. Who knows?
And the number of drones is irrelevant, because those aren't really included in the costs of logging for an operational authorization.
You can take a very dim view of why these figures were put together, which is precisely why this kind of work is so important that Richard's carried out, and of course the follow-ups that will come through this channel and through other work. because people need to know that they're going to be held to account if they're going to talk absolute rubbish about a hobby and an industry that we all care so much about, that is, really is people's income streams, basically, and should be something the UK should have been very, very proud of. I mean, but back when we had 7,000 and we could have built on that, that's a pretty great thing. But all we've watched is the figures go down and down, and it's not as if this is the first time they've misrepresented the current authorizations either. If you go back through our live shows, if you're that brave, there are several shows where we show slides and reports where they again show double the figure that's actually the true position. It's incredible. So,
and can I just point out, for the first time in 7 or 8 years, I don't hold a PDR A01 operational authorization. I've let it lapse until I need it. So that's
likewise. I let mine lapse too.
Shocking.
Just because, as a lawyer, it just became a regulatory nightmare. The red tape around this. I mean, we were speaking briefly at the beginning. That now the Chancellor of the Exchequer is coming out and going to all the regulators to slash red tape to grow the economy. I'd be interested to see what the CAA and the DFT's proposals are with respect to that.
They're getting us to write it.
Oh, don't. We know Richard, yes, and perhaps you, but yes, indeed. Okay, the next section. In relation to the 75,000 figure, the CAA's decision to include that figure was to show industry predictions of drones in operation. The 75,000 figure from the PW Skies version 1 people reports increased to 900,000 in their V2 report. Why didn't they show that then? These are industry predictions, and the CAA has always treated them as such. Industry forecasts are only used in CAA modelling where there is a high degree of confidence in the outputs. Otherwise, industry forecasts are used to inform the own scenario modelling and test its assumptions. Could somebody explain to me how that paragraph relates to this paragraph in the annual accounts, talking about the DISCO implementation?
No.
Where? No. What? I just, sometimes the only word is what, and that's what I feel about this. So they're saying they're using an old figure, and perhaps they're using the old figures. It's more believable than the 900,000, because again, no disrespect to PwC and that report. Everyone's got their own opinions, but if you read the disclaimers on that report, it does its job. And it's whether or not you want to use those figures for the thing you're doing is up to you. So, this is not a bashing session on that as such. But it's saying these are industry predictions and they've already treated them as such. Okay, that would, I presume, have included putting footnotes and explainers when using them in annual accounts.
And there, I think we've got an answer to your CAA modelling, Richard, because they've taken 75,000 from a report and they've said, our model says this cell equals that cell. We'll use that 75,000.
Our model says we like the sound of 75,000.
But by modelling it, we don't need to put an asterisk on it and say we got it from there.
Yes.
It's our own number. It's our very own 75,000.
Yes, and 17. I do love the wording of some of these. Sometimes the way that counsel or lawyers and solicitors will word things is fantastic. But so procedural impropriety ground. For the reasons set out at paragraphs 10 to 16 of this letter, it is denied that the CAA's inadvertent error amounts to failing to follow proper procedures in verifying data accuracy and ensuring internal controls were in place. Everybody in the cheap seats hear us there? So after telling us that the figures are absolutely accurate and we did our job before,
and they believe them to be correct,
in these paragraphs 10 to 16 that they are quoting here, it is denied that their inadvertent error, despite the fact that they're telling us where these... How can you inadvertently place incorrect figures in a report like this that are from different things?
Well, you wouldn't if you're following a proper procedure.
Well, no,
Yeah,
no,
and
no,
I
no.
also
they
know
haven't-
You're wrong.
they haven't
You're wrong,
fa-
because
they-
it says here that
it says they haven't failed
deny
to
failing to
yeah.
follow proper procedures in
Oh,
verifying data
that must
accuracy.
definitely be the case then. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and ensuring internal controls were in place. And yet
Yes.
earlier on, they admitted that they went through a number of layers, both internal and external. We now
Yeah.
know who the external auditor is.
We do, yes, and you may already be impressed by Richard's work on these letters. You have got no idea the work that goes into these things behind the scenes and the sheer hours. I am actually launching an investigation into whether or not Richard Ryan has been cloned. And we there is actually 3 of him, because I've no idea how he finds the time to do all of this. And of course, being an extremely busy person himself. So the next one is claimant request to issue formal correction and apology. Point 21. As mentioned at paragraph 8 of this letter, the CAA admits that the figures on page 51 of the annual report were included in error. The CAA intends to correct the error in the annual report by publishing that correction on the CAA public website. 22, obviously via a revised CAP document. 22, given the CAA's planned publication of a correction and the failure of the PAP letter to identify any loss or other damage caused to a general or specific group of people, the proposed claimant has not identified a basis for which an apology should be issued, and as such, the CAA will not be issuing one.
I'd just like to come back on that loss point, right? So the loss point that they've made there is completely misleading.
Irrelevant.
It's nothing about loss here.
No.
It's about challenging what they've done.
It would be like saying, to use the oranges and elephants thing again, it would be like saying, we're not going to service your car because it has no engine, or you're using a completely incorrect identification process in terms of why there should be an apology. It's completely incorrect. It's again, people are reacting to point 17 in the chat at the moment. But this is bizarre.
You don't have to have a pecuniary interest or suffer a loss in order to be a person to submit a claim for judicial review. You just don't, and that's why that's misleading. I don't know why they think that that's the case. But what we have to do is ensure that a public authority acts lawfully. And so given the seriousness of presenting incorrect and misleading information to Parliament, we're calling that into question because we are stakeholders.
Yes. With
respect to the production of that report.
Absolutely.
And that's why that's important, just to clarify that piece there.
No, indeed. And, to do as little as you can to correct an error of this type, to me, does seem disingenuous. It doesn't really show the seriousness of what's happened here, and their response to it.
There's a level of arrogance, isn't there?
It does come across that way.
Go away.
Yeah. It does certainly come across that way. And point 23, which is claimant request to review internal processes. Everything's okay, guys. We're saved. We're saved. The references on page 51 of the annual report were made in error. The CAA regularly reviews its internal processes and confirms that will continue to do so. So someone in the chat referenced that this should be a line in Yes, Prime Minister for point 17. This also feels that way. I don't know. If somebody said that to me as an answer down the pub, I'm not sure I wouldn't want to shine their chin, frankly, because to tell me in one sentence that they were made an error, and with all of the other paragraphs of explanation they've given, to then say the CAA regularly reviews its internal processes and confirms it will continue to do so, I would say do not continue to do so, because your internal processes don't work.
I guarantee now, I'll say it now, prediction for 2025. I don't think I've made any, but I reckon that let's give them till the end of March to do that. Brilliant. We'll do that. And then I reckon between March and December next year, we will find lots of CAP documents with lots of errors in that could have been picked up if they had internal processes that have been.
Well, how many have we found over the last couple of years already?
Well, precisely. That's why I'm confident.
Yeah.
And every single time we get this sort of response. So I'm confident they're not going to employ anybody checking them. The people who do check them appear to be lacking competence to do so. So it'll continue unless unless somebody
Yeah.
pulls up the drains.
And I think on that point, really what underlies this is public trust in the regulator.
Yes.
Their statutory duties do extend beyond the mere publication of audited financials, right? They've got to provide accurate information. It's got to be reliable, properly verified information to Parliament. Okay, and what I'm concerned about really is the integrity and credibility of the CAA at the moment, because all they've offered is a correction to Parliament. Really, it should be much more to that. We should have had an apology. This is a clear error that demands an apology, because I think it is linked to the consultation on the scheme of charges. And this is how, or indeed, as we mooted earlier, is it their quest for funding? More funding.
That's
I
right.
don't know. And so, going back to the public trust, it is all about public trust. And as the drone community, stakeholders, and the industry should be really concerned about this at the moment. And I think there's a lot to be derived from these letters, because it does show us what is going on within the CAA culturally at the moment.
Indeed, no, I completely agree with that, and this is such an important thing to follow through on, because otherwise, with the current decline we have, the existing specific category business levels are declining because of regulation. And yes, a certain amount of those are moving across into the open category, but not the heavy lift drones and a lot of the people that are disappearing. And indeed, on the groups where we see many people saying, that's it, I'm done, I'm not renewing, and selling their equipment. There's been so many Inspires for sale and Matrices for sale, etc. People just giving up. And yes, that part of that is economy, but this is a growing sector worldwide. By incredible levels.
More concerning are people who will carry on operating and just say, yeah, I'm doing this under the A2 CFC, operate as they used to, overflight. They used to that 50-meter horizontal, that would go out the window. But there's no oversight there and nothing to stop them. Yeah. So they will do that rather than stay within that oversight regime.
That's right, which is where you then come round to the point where you are left in a very uncomfortable position with these responses, as Richard has so eloquently described, and we need to start seeing some action on this. It's beyond anything now, because it's not as if you have one small part of drone use in the UK that is unsettled at the moment. You have a specific category that is confused and is angry and is forever being forced to become smaller and smaller. You have a future flight category that, by the very definition, still doesn't exist beyond some blood samples being taken for PR reasons between two London hospitals, and
yet seems to be driving the cost base.
Yes, and you have an open category that is full of confusion and advice versus legislation, and actually that advice pushing the VLOS AMC has pushed more people in the open category away from following regulation, and I mean following as in keeping up with it and deciding to stick to it, than anything else. My video on that has more comments of people saying I'm done than anything else. It's incredible. It has over 1,000 comments, and most people are pretty much done with following, and that's upsetting for someone that's built a channel around informing people of the regulations and bringing people along with us. And where on earth is the certified category? It's that is why the thumbnail this evening dramatically talks about the competency and whether or not we are getting that at the moment in airspace regulation. One of my issues here is that when I look at the growth of the RPAS team, or the FS&I team as it's now called, it's a very short hop from when I listened to Mark Worry in the chat at DroneX talking about needing funding because they don't. I think at that point it was something like 16 or 18 people, I think, Mark, or something like that were in the RPAS team. But of course, all of those desks were fee earning, as it were. So they're all dealing with matters that bring money in, be it drone registration, or of course the specific category operational authorization holders, or OSCs. So, and there is, as we know from the accounts, there's a healthy amount of money coming in. suddenly, of course, that number of people explodes, and you have all these different teams. And in the panel show, I'm going to show the graph of the teams to show you just how many teams
The
and just how many people
organogram.
involved. Yes, but it's incredible. But of course, most of those teams, a lot of them are by FS&I, by Future Flight, by its nature, of course, aren't actually bringing the money in at the moment. So you also have to wonder if a doubling of fee is purely to pay for a lot more desks that aren't doing anything. And by doing that, of course, you're then killing yet more of the specific category off. It's a very worrying cycle that doesn't seem to have a set of breaks, and is also incapable of self-review to the point of being open enough and being honest enough to offer a simple apology for what is a tangible and substantial mistake. I don't think you can call it an error or even necessarily a mistake, you know, for misleading Parliament and the public. And even using that word misleading, you can mislead someone even if it was an error or something that shouldn't have happened. It still happens. So the apology is still there. And as Richard quite rightly says, we don't have to prove loss. Although I would have thought there's a few operational authorization holders who can prove loss from the CAA personally, but there we go. So it's interesting from that point of view. Now, in terms of the ongoing work, Richard hasn't stopped there. None of us have, frankly. But Richard, you've then put in a freedom of information request off the back of a lot of the answers gained in the judicial review pre-work. Because just to clarify for everybody, the judicial review it stops there from the point of view that they're going to change the information. So is that the core of the judicial review answered, essentially?
So it comes to an end because we didn't file a claim in court for permission for judicial review.
Yes.
So we went through the pre-action protocol procedure to get to a point where we could establish what the position would be. And we also offered alternative dispute resolution. I offered to have a conversation with the CAA, you know, in order to understand how they're going to publish this. When are they going to publish this correction? Why won't they issue a public apology? To talk to me a little bit more about their procedures in order to restore my public trust in the regulator. You know, I wanted to really understand what it is they're doing and what lessons they've learned by this, so they don't do it again. And they point blank refused, just did not want to engage at all. And you'd think that somebody who's started this process, which is, you know, it's not an easy process to start, and it does take time, and you know there are consequences from it. You'd think they'd want to engage in that dialogue, and the court recommends it as well. You know, the court recommends some form of mediation or whatever it may.
It makes complete sense to do so.
Yeah. So we got to the stage whereby, I mean, we were pressed for time. So from the date the report was published until we ceased, I think that, you know, it had to be done before the 12th of December. So our 3-month time limit for judicial review was close to expiring, which is why we started this after your show. And my first letter went out on the 29th of November. So from 29th of November, obviously, to the 12th of December, we've got a short time frame. I don't think the CAA were particularly comfortable in operating in such a short time frame. I think they wanted more time. And that may be why they refused to meet with me and have those discussions. But it was offered. And of course, we had a few more letters after the ones that we've talked through today, Sean, to get to that point on the 12th of December. But yeah, ultimately it stopped there because, you know, my view was we've got a public apology. Sorry, no, we didn't get a public apology. We've got an acknowledgement and an admission that they made an error and they're going to send it to Parliament for a correction. If I was the judge, potentially, I would say, well, you've got what you want, Mr. Ryan. What else is there? So, you know, it's that balance of do I go or not? And then there are consequences should you pursue something like that. And so that had to be balanced also. So I think because they offered that, and they offered that straight away, that's a really important thing, point to make. Because they offered it early in the process, It didn't come late at the 11th hour.
Yes.
It came early. Given that was the case, a judge would probably look at that as well and say, well, they did come to the table early and realise that they made an error and they've made an admission. Again, what else do you want from this, Mr. Ryan? You want a public apology. A judge would probably think, is that worth actually going for judicial review? But before you get there, you still have to apply for permission for judicial review, which would go before a judge to make that decision anyway. But you'd still incur costs in filing a claim and everything else. So I took a view on that. The fact that they'd done that meant really that we should stop there. I was my personal view, because that made commercial sense.
But it's also a reasonable decision to come to, from the point of view that you're facing a not insubstantial wall of potential legal action against you as well, from the point of view of, as you say, the implications of moving forward at that point are not just financial, but they are financial, and in bringing it to the point where they are going to be correcting it, of course, that does mean they're going to have to, at some point, tell Parliament, and hopefully that will trigger even Parliament to say, okay, well, why was this wrong in the first place? Hopefully somebody within that civil service system will say, okay, this needs looking into, because this is a little bizarre. Who knows? Yeah,
well, definitely, this going through this procedure would have definitely put this up there.
Yes.
I was dealing with the Office for General Counsel. I'm sure the CEO would have been made aware of it too. If not, I'd be incredibly surprised.
No, indeed.
And so, the CAA have taken note of this, and they now know that there are people out there that are going to challenge them.
Exactly.
And it isn't just because they're the regulator. We all pay our fee, or I used to pay my fee for my PRA1, but lots of people pay their fees for a service that they want, on the basis that they've got trust in the regulator. Now, when we see this kind of conduct, the question for me is, well, how much trust should we have in the regulator?
Yes, and to have that trust re-established, we need the transparency. We need access to the information that resulted in this error happening, and to see the meetings, the conversations, the reports, etc., that were compiled for this paragraph. Indeed, was this paragraph even invented for this report, or has it appeared somewhere else first and was therefore seen as legitimate and cut and pasted? We just don't know. So we need that information, and it's very, very important, which again is why in this series, following this series of videos coming up to present all of this information and evidence to our audience, we will be then asking you, the loyal viewer, to come forward with that. Now, that's going to be pretty much it for this evening's show, because I want to keep these in enough bite size from the point of view of being able to not overfill your sponges as well, and mine, frankly, as well. But if you wouldn't mind, towards the end of the show here, if you could hit the like button, I would really appreciate it. It does help spread the show a little bit out there as well. But we're going to be returning on Monday for another live show. There are 2 other live shows planned in this series and another recorded video. They'll have CAA in the title, so you will know, but there is already, in fact, I will go across and grab the link very quickly whilst Graham gives his closing thoughts on what we've seen.
I want to give a round of applause to anybody who sat through this from the beginning to the end and stuck with it, because this is like a Christmas cake. It is full of fruit, there's some nuts in there as well, and it might be hard to digest, but it's good stuff, and it is worth getting through, because it's it is important. It is really critical, and we've this is at the end of a year or 2 years where we have seen a lot of errors, and we just can't keep having those errors coming through. We can't. And we shouldn't, and we should demand better. How much do they charge us before before everybody demands good quality?
Yes, we need to get back to a position where we feel like we're working with regulators to enhance the industry. working with them to find, the whole idea of consultation is to consult and find the right level, to consult and find good feedback in terms of ensuring they're not doing anything that will damage industry just through over-regulation, etc. Hopefully the government review of that will help as well. I'm just putting a link in the chat for the show on Monday. So once this is finished, click on that and click on the remind me button, and it will send you a notification half an hour before the show goes live. But I'm really looking forward to it, just from the point of view of I've managed to see, because I've got a very large screen with the chat up here, and I've managed to see some of the conversations happening with Mark Worry and Matt Williams and others going by. If you're watching the replay, I suggest you go back and actually just re-watch the chat. There's some very interesting things happening in there.
I'm copying all that.
Yeah, and it's a very small example of what we're hoping the panel on Monday will start to bring to things. And that's the idea of these shows, is to bring all of this information to light. But yes, and Richard, once you have your responses back from the delayed freedom of information, we'll have to do a show to run through that, because of course that will be the freedom of information follow-up that's happened to this pre-action, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And it also includes another freedom of information that I put in before this action after this action started.
Super.
So yeah,
yes. So
it'll be interesting.
Hopefully, we'll get some even more interesting morsels of information from that as well. Which is, it feels bizarre that we have to go to all of these measures and to fight even those responses to get information that, of course, is essentially public information. Hence, a Freedom of Information Act response can actually be made. This is not information owned by somebody. I know that there is a commercial nature to the CAA in the way that it's set up and the way that it operates, but it is still a public body, and it is still accountable to the public, and we need to ensure that they realise that as much as anybody else, frankly.
It's owned by us, isn't it?
Well, yes, exactly. But thank you everybody for joining me. It's been fantastic to see such a wide and user type in the chat, but also that the numbers have been very healthy on this and other videos and other live streams of this type. I was once told that people don't want to talk about drone regulation on YouTube, and certainly our audience is disproving that, unless of course you're just here for Graham's shirts.
It's possible.
Could it be that, Graham?
Possible.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll see you next on this setup with these two guys and more on Monday. But I will see you again very soon. So we've got some more updates on a few other stories coming out later this week. You lucky people. It's been a busy week for us already. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham.
Cheers, everyone.
Sean out.